Welcome back to Beyond the Blocks. On social media, there's plenty of discussions whenever Roblox decides to roll out a change to its platform, often ending up in the question of whether Roblox will remain on top or if another platform could ever take its crown. This week, we're looking at Fortnite and Polytoria, two alternatives that are complete opposite ends of the spectrum. But first, we're your hosts. I'm Adam.
And I'm Fedor.
So, like I say, there's a lot of discussion right now. I think it's been reignited by the discussion around all the chat changes that Roblox have been rolling out, age estimation that seems to be affecting quite a few platforms now. And like I say, I often check out Reddit and check out forums, and there is this discussion around whether other platforms could work, both from a player's perspective, in terms of getting the experience that they want, communicating with their friends and playing enjoyable experiences, and from a developer point of view, particularly on the professional side of things, as there are probably some developers who fully rely on Roblox as their income stream, and if something happened to Roblox, that could be a bit of a danger. So there's a couple of different platforms that people mention, and one is UEFN. So do you want to explain what UEFN is, Fedor, and what it has in store for devs?
I'm gonna be honest. I've been trying to avoid spending as much time on social media as possible on Twitter, and all of these websites recently, just focusing on work. But these, the dissatisfaction with the Roblox platform has even reached me back home. I went back home these past 2 weekends to visit my family, and my younger brother was expressing great dissatisfaction with these new changes Roblox has announced regarding chat safety and moderation. And it seems like that sentiment was shared by a lot of his similarly aged peers. So a platform that they've been spending a little bit of time on recently, taking away from his sort of diet of pure Roblox, at least to some extent, has been Fortnite. And so over the past couple of months, I've personally played, obviously I've played Fortnite, the Battle Royale modes, but I never really took UEFN that seriously, which, if you're unfamiliar, is Fortnite's answer to the Roblox platform. Simply put, their idea is you take the fundamental engine underlying the Fortnite game, which is Unreal Engine, sort of a standard in the broader gaming industry, and you give some starter assets, a general identity that is the Fortnite brand, and you give that to creators who have already been trying, for years. I remember when Fortnite first rolled out pseudo editable modes like Playground, where you could kind of create your own stuff. And they've gradually evolved this editor from a very primitive sort of here's Fortnite, but with a couple of fun things you can do on the side, into what it is now, where it's basically the entirety of Unreal Engine just taken into Fortnite, where you can build out a game that is as similar or as different from Fortnite as you'd like, and then publish it into the Fortnite Discovery, where players just scrolling through the Fortnite platform can join in and play with their friends.
Yeah, nice. It is very similar to Roblox in that sense, and I think this came out a few years after Battle Royale sort of really took off. I think that was like 2017 when Fortnite first came out, but sort of in the early 2020s is where we got this kind of UGC platform, is what they call it, right? User generated content. So yeah, I think it was an interesting point that you mentioned there of you can pretty much exploit the Unreal Engine to its full potential if you want to, but quite similar to when you make a new base plate on Roblox. You make a new place and it's empty, but you have a character controller, you have some physics, there's a backpack system in Roblox, there's a chat system, and those kind of fundamentals exist also in Fortnite when you create a new island, they're called, in Fortnite. But as with Roblox, you can throw that away and build something completely custom on there. I guess there's a question of how often people actually do that and whether it's beneficial to do that. Why would you do that in Fortnite versus just Unreal Engine itself if you had that ability, where you can then distribute it wherever you like.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all answers the team at Epic Games have been trying to figure out over the past couple of years. Like you said, it's no coincidence that a lot of Fortnite UEFN feels very similar to how the Roblox experience is. It's very clear that Fortnite is recognizing that the sole battle royale live service operation, which has been, the primary breadwinner for more than a decade now, clearly it's still continuing to do well, but it seems like they're very clearly trying to expand out of that. And that, like you said, trying to see more diverse content is something they've been trying to push for by leveling up the editor and by adding various monetization programs. But if you or really anybody takes a scroll through UEFN like I did a couple of days ago, just opening up Fortnite for the first time in a little bit, you'll notice that a lot of the platform has chosen to stick with that very, like you said, that fundamental Fortnite-esque character controller, Fortnite characters and Fortnite mechanics. The inventory, the shooting, the combat is all largely reminiscent of the core Fortnite game, and the individual islands aren't as much wildly new things as much as they are, here's the Fortnite movement controller, but your objective is to complete an obstacle course, or here's the movement controller and the gun system, but instead of shooting other players, you're shooting props that are running around, and the other players like turn into props, and it's the classic game of prop hunt. And I think that is something that Fortnite has really struggled to grow out of, or rather, UEFN has struggled to grow out of, in the sense that Roblox as a platform is always, since the very early beginnings, 20 years ago now plus, has been a surface for user created content. And while there's a sort of fundamental understanding of what is a Roblox avatar, and there's some general aesthetic ideas that are constantly being challenged by people like we've seen on this podcast. We have very hyper realistic bus simulators, and we have low poly pixelated, or not pixelated, but stud styled garden growing games that coexist on the platform. But fundamentally, Roblox has been a surface for creators to build very widely different things on. Whereas Fortnite, like everybody knows, originated and still very much is in a lot of cases a live service multiplayer battle royale style game. And what I think the fundamental sort of thing holding them back is that identity, in the sense that when I, as a player, go to Fortnite, I'm not thinking about, how can I grow a garden, or how can I drive buses, or how can I even, dress up on a runway and show off my awesome style. I'm thinking about, okay, I'm about to get into a game where I have a harvesting tool and an inventory and some guns, and I'm expecting some variation of a very, very fun and very, beautifully crafted and perfected version over a decade now of third-person combat, but that is ultimately what players are expecting. And that is, as a consequence, what does the best on the UEFN platform. As much as you see team deathmatch games and hide-and-seek games and box fights games, these are all sort of mini games built on top of the base Fortnite engine, not really standalone titles that share a common aesthetic, which is what I think Roblox has really pushed for.
Identity crisis is a really interesting point because until looking into this as a developer, considering the alternative UGC platforms, I had no idea that you could do anything on Fortnite other than either Battle Royale or these kind of similar genres of game, right? I think Capture the Flag and Team Deathmatch and all those types of things are essentially really just the same core mechanics. And so, yeah, how could you expect players to necessarily know that? And it's interesting that they lent into putting it in Fortnite as opposed to launching an individual platform for this. I suppose you've got to weigh up, you've already got a pretty big existing player base for Fortnite, and keeping them around and using them for this user-generated platform versus bringing in people who actively chose not to play Fortnite because they didn't like that default mode that was all that existed back in 2017. And it seems like they've still not got over that hurdle. It's also interesting, I watched a video that was a talk from Unreal, from Unreal Engine. I think it was the team there sort of promoting UEFN, and they were essentially just explaining to the audience why they should make their next game on UEFN. And the demo that they showed was a capture the flag using the default character controller, using the default backpack. The purpose of the demo was to show that in about a minute, you've got a playable game in terms of the core mechanics. And it did show that very well. But in doing so, you just create another slight variant on what is a very Fortnite looking and Fortnite feeling experience. And that's the problem, I think, with a lot of the built-in devices they call, but they're essentially behaviors that you can use out the box and just tweak slightly for your game. They are built around combat games, essentially. It doesn't have to be Battle Royale, but they're built around combat games. And I think the struggle, the uphill battle that you got to face to try and build something that isn't a combat game really requires you to have a lot of game development experience with Unreal Engine as a whole. Whereas, yes, something a bit more freeform like Roblox that has been UGC from day one, everybody knows that that's what it is, and that it doesn't have that same identity crisis. So it's a really, really interesting point. And it sort of comes back to, the challenge to get people to switch to UEFN means that it has to be a very compelling place, which means it has to, from a professional point of view, replace the income that you would potentially get from another platform, which means it has to have a lot of players who spend there. And if you have an identity crisis that's stopping you from bringing players who are expecting genres other than combat, it's quite hard to make that sell for developers who are interested in non-combat games.
Yeah, and to the team at Unreal and Epic Games' credit, they have been pushing a lot of really, really interesting stuff to this entire ecosystem. Stuff that, perhaps Roblox could take notes on. I've been sort of vaguely following this stuff, as I think, like you mentioned, there's a lot of Roblox developers who are very sorely aware of their, I am one of them, our very precarious situation and dependence upon the Roblox platform. Because if, for whatever tragic reason, Roblox were to go away or to lose its audience for some reason, I would personally be out of my primary source of income. And as such, I've been sort of following a lot of these changes they've been implementing, and they've been doing a lot of very interesting and correct things. They've rolled out microtransactions. For a while, the only way you could monetize the things you were building on UEFN was through engagement payouts, which seemed like an interesting formula initially and something that Roblox has messed around with and actually currently has. But it seemed to be a little bit too lackluster to make it possible for certain experiences to thrive, because obviously you could build things that kept players engaged for very long periods of time, but sort of concepts that would do really well on Roblox, where you have a player and they engage for a little bit, but then they're incentivized to spend, just couldn't exist on the platform. They've also done a lot of really interesting stuff with the engine. Like we've mentioned, it's arguably a lot more powerful than the Roblox engine as it is right now. We're always talking about how great Slim and these new technologies are, but there's something to be said about the fact that Unreal is the industry standard, and a lot of the features that we're really excited to get on Roblox have been in all these engines for years at this point. They also have obviously been investing really heavily into these experiences with payout systems, like I mentioned. brands are a lot more willing to invest into Fortnite games because the idea of a Fortnite integration, at least for a while, I've seen this definitely shift over the past couple of years, where the idea of a Roblox branded experience is no longer that crazy. But for a while, when you thought of big video game and collaboration, you really thought of the, Fortnite concerts and the collaborations that they would do with custom avatars. So a lot of brands were much more willing to see, oh wow, Travis Scott did a collaboration with Fortnite. Let's go do a collaboration with a Fortnite UEFN experience as opposed to something on a Roblox. I don't know what that is. There's
I think there
certainly
was
a lot.
less friction, definitely on sort of the character side. Like I think the players on Fortnite were probably more open to it looking different, which means for brands they can really match their brand identity. Whereas when you see brands collaborate on Roblox, it's sort of Robloxified, right? And some brands aren't
Absolutely.
necessarily willing to have that.
But I think, in spite of all these wonderful things, there are a couple of very specific things that I've noticed about the UEFN platform that I think, besides the overall identity issue, that are holding them back in a lot of ways. One big thing is that if you open up the Fortnite launcher, or I guess the Fortnite game, as you'd call it, you see your battle royale modes, the sort of the bread and butter of the Fortnite live ops operation, and you see the various Epic Games approved game modes. And then to really see anything UEFN related, you have to scroll down a little bit. And I think that is really a big thing that they've been working to try to improve, which namely is discovery. In the sense that finding unique things to play on UEFN, in my experience at least, is really not that easy as it is on Roblox. Because, like I said, Roblox's identity for its entire existence has been a surface for discovery to get into user created games. Whereas this Fortnite identity has kind of two diverging incentives, where on one hand, there's a massive chunk of the audience that really only cares about the Battle Royale shooter experience. So then, as they try to push the UEFN stuff, they're taking away a little bit from the discover or from the ease of access to the core battle royale mode, which some players are dissatisfied by. So it's this very weird thing where, like, okay, we want to show people new things, but we also don't want to deprioritize battle royale. So maybe let's show them new things, but then those new things are still kind of similar to battle royale. Like I said, getting into those box fights or those team based modes, as opposed to something completely radically different. And because of that, I think there's really not much of an incentive to do and go into really drastically new directions. In fact, I've listened to a lot of really interesting interviews with game industry veterans who have founded or are core parts of UEFN studios talk about how they came into this being like, wow, there's millions of people online and Fortnite and Epic Games are pushing new stuff all of the time. So we're going to go in and we're going to take our game development expertise and build radically new stuff. And then sort of over the course of maybe a 5-minute interview, they come to the that conclusion that actually it makes a lot more sense to build out, capture the flag, red versus blue, or these other sort of not repetitive, sorry, that's a bit not quite the right word, but more in vein with that core Fortnite identity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you need there to be some sort of incentive to bring people over to make new genres, but that identity crisis followed by the sort of the conflict of interest of Epic Games creating their own islands and their own game modes within this definitely is a bit confusing. Roblox's website is almost entirely the entire purpose of Roblox's website is to surface user-generated content, and that is it. Occasionally, you'll get a Roblox-sponsored event, which maybe takes over a bit, and honestly, that can be quite annoying and jarring to some users anyway. But 90% of the time, the Roblox website is to surface user-generated content, and they've had 20 years of experience dialing that in and continue to dial that in with some of the new sorts that we've talked about. So are there no
And
sorts on UEFN in terms of, how Roblox has a recommended for you and a continue playing and, those kind of things?
sorry, I just want to jump back to what you said really quickly regarding Roblox events, because that sort of brought back some interesting memories. Because Roblox has tackled this question pretty directly. And while in its 20 years now, we can pretty concretely say that Roblox is a platform and a surface for user created content, and they as a company don't really do anything in terms of do anything is a bit broad, do anything in the nature of creating experiences for people to play. There was a time in the bigger Roblox events, and it was actually a very controversial decision at the time for Roblox to shelf things like the egg hunt or the Halloween events or the winter events that they'd do, as Roblox endorsed and Roblox created experiences. And there was a lot of negative feedback from the community at the time saying, like, hey, we want this and we want Roblox to keep making stuff on the Roblox platform. So it's very interesting to see how it seems like they were, as people come up with their own egg hunts and their own events that, to my experience, are actually pretty exciting and seem to be doing pretty well. It seems like Roblox made the right call and, avoided navigating that really weird sort of intersection of, oh, this is like a Roblox affiliated thing that's making money for us, but then also here's UGC stuff, which is exactly what Fortnite's experiencing now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the latest incarnation of Roblox events, which aren't really events, are like these spotlights, right? That we had for Halloween and for winter, where it's sort of a gateway to discover user generated content. And it might be curated, it might be sort of presented in a different way, but it's very, very different to a first party experience created by Roblox. So it's interesting to see how, Epic Games try and deal with that, and sort of what changes they might roll out in the future. But I think right now that is a big sticking point for sure.
Yeah. And then you were asking a question regarding sorts, and I think there is some limited. Like I said, I've personally not taken that much time to develop or release titles on UEFN. So, if you have a thought, drop it down in the comments below. But to my understanding, the discovery algorithm, in the sense of an algorithm, is very rudimentary and largely consists of like, hey, here's what you played most recently, and then here are some of the biggest things that people are playing right now. Very similar to sort of very old versions of the Roblox homepage that kind of just surface the biggest things, which probably isn't helping this identity issue where people come to Fortnite to play a shooter, they scroll down to the user-generated section, and all they see are variations of shooter survival games. They go into those, and they, probably have a pretty great time because, like I said, that framework is really polished. But then they're not really ever pushed to discover new things.
It is this chicken and egg situation of, if all the players there are expecting that, then that's the only thing that succeeds. You need to bring developers in to create other genres, other types of games. But why would they do that if the players there aren't ready to receive that sort of genre? And maybe Discovery changes that, but I'm not sure. I think maybe incentives to create those certain genres might do it. I know that, for example, Roblox are looking to try and feature and encourage competitive games and sport-based games. They want to try and break into the esports market. It'll be interesting to see if UEFN try and push some of those other genres and try and incentivize people to create those. But I think so far we've not really seen that, other than maybe sort of the concerts and like the brand partnerships.
Yeah, and then I think another sort of more numerical issue in this sort of dichotomy between Fortnite and UEFN is the sheer difference in player counts. I remember there was sort of this time where Roblox games and Fortnite events were really going toe to toe in terms of dethroning one another as the biggest concurrent game. So in my head, I sort of had this perception that like the Fortnite player base and the Roblox player base were somewhat comparable. But if you actually look at a live player count tracker for both platforms, today at Friday, 3 p.m. Pacific time, which is getting ready for that weekend rush in the next following few days. Fortnite is sitting at 1.2 million concurrent players with a 1.286. That's pretty much a 24-hour peak, which makes sense. Whereas Roblox is at just under 10 times that with 12,200,000 concurrent players, which, if you think about it, is pretty drastic considering a large chunk of those 1.2 million. If I had to say, I'd imagine 80-ish%. Oh, I can see it actually. Sorry. The most players on any of the Fortnite islands, as they're called, is Battle Royale with 354,000 concurrent, Reload, which is another Epic Games created game mode, at 200,000, Fortnite OG, which is another Epic Games created island, at 90,000, and then Steal the Brainrot, which is a user created game, very similar, or actually more or less an identical copy of a Roblox game, at 50,000 players. Whereas if you look at Roblox right now, that 12 million is entirely, obviously, in the platform's nature, entirely user-created genres. So there's definitely just a very large disparity in the sheer number of players who are looking to play drastically new things. And then I think there's also, perhaps for another episode, probably another interesting discussion we could talk about regarding why it is that the biggest Fortnite user created games and islands are frequently copies or inspired versions of existing Roblox games. But that's a whole nother can of worms we don't want to open on this episode. So
Absolutely.
I think if I had to summarize UEFN as a Roblox competitor, it seems like the biggest thing that it has a lot of potential in terms of funding, in terms of audience, in terms of developer tools. Like I said, I think they've got some things that arguably beat out Roblox Studio, but fundamentally it's suffering from a really complicated and 10-year-old at this point identity issue, where it seems like a large chunk of the player base is really only interested in playing the Fortnite they've known for 10 years, and only a small chunk of players are being pushed or even have the opportunity to see anything that is remotely different. So you have all these wonderful tools and you have the monetization and the funding, but ultimately there's just not that demand for anything different compared to the Roblox platform.
That is really interesting. I think there's maybe one final point that I think transitions us nicely into another alternative. But with Fortnite, the creators of these islands have to be 18 plus to publish. And we also talked about how essentially it's like an Unreal Engine editor in terms of how you edit these games, just with a few pre-built bits already there. And I think that means it feels a lot more professional, a lot more, high skilled in terms of getting into Fortnite development. That is probably great for the professionals and great for a huge portion of the market who are trying to make money from game development. But what it does potentially shut out and doesn't cater for are young people and people who are new to game development who just want to try out and sort of see what it's like and sort of have a quite approachable sandbox that they can play around in. And that's something that Roblox really was for me and quite a lot of other people when I was younger and growing up. Got me interested in physics, got me interested in engineering and interested in game development. And I think that's something that UEFN doesn't really cater for, but perhaps this other alternative does, which is Polytoria. And you might have heard people talk about Polytoria, you might not. I think some big Roblox YouTubers have created videos on it. Probably a few weeks ago, we were a bit behind the curve in terms of talking about it. But it is essentially much more of a clone of Roblox, but sort of a clone of Roblox if you went back 15 years. Because I think it has very nostalgic 2011 Roblox vibes. It is sort of hobbyist, passion-based, feels a lot more blocky, a lot more simple in terms of its visual fidelity. and a lot more stripped back. The editor, I would say, is even more approachable than Roblox Studio is today in terms of new creators. But essentially, this is something that comes up fairly frequently, these kind of Roblox clones, as they sometimes get called, and they might try and differentiate themselves in certain ways, but you can tell they're heavily Roblox inspired, where it is fully UGC based, sort of on the complete opposite end of the spectrum to UEFN. They are trying to take the same corner of the market as Roblox, but suffer from that same chicken and egg situation of how do you get good quality fun games that someone who is playing Roblox today in 2026 would happily switch over to that platform? How do you get those high quality games if you're relying on hobbyist and passion projects? Because the skilled professionals won't do it. They won't work for free. This platform doesn't have any monetization that you can earn from. And so how do you get players over there to play these games when there isn't the high quality there yet? And how do you get the high quality devs over when there's nobody there to play your game? So this is the challenge that I think it is currently facing.
Yeah, I think in the vein of this isn't the first website like it. I personally haven't really, like I said, haven't been on Twitter as much, and therefore have kind of ignored Polytoria in its recent state, because I think as I frequently harken back to my many years on this platform, I've seen a lot of very similarly inspired and exciting and brand new alternatives to Roblox come up, only for them to be shuttered in about 3 to 6 months when players realize that there really isn't anything fun to be had. And I think this too can also be ascribed to a slightly different variant of the identity issue we were talking about with Fortnite, in the sense that Roblox sort of balances between that hobbyist and that professional thing that you talk about a lot. And perhaps while Fortnite has, it's been maintained by Epic Games, a true and proper game development studio, so it's always been maybe even too much in the professional, where it seems inaccessible to new developers as they try to push it out to UEFN creators. Roblox has, like we said, been a place for hobbyists and new players and creators to turn into, for players to turn into creators. That's probably a tagline that they've used at some point. I don't quite remember. That has been at the core of the Roblox platform. And as Roblox has sort of aged up, and as, certain companies have grown and new companies have come onto the platform with a lot of professional experience and corporate structure and contracts and salaries, God forbid, the horror, the platform has become a little bit more similar to a lot of these professional game development industry, the broader game development industry. So there's periodically a desire by players and by some of the creators to go back to a simpler time when it was less about the money and less about these sort of real things like paying bills and creating profitable businesses, which is ultimately what all of these successful Roblox games are, back to a time of, just pure creation for truly the love of the game. And while, like you said, that can seem like a lot of fun, and it's certainly, I've bought into that dream many a time in the past, it ultimately is a little bit unsustainable when you're trying to compete with games that are true businesses that bring in revenue and that have the funds to hire incredible artists and incredible programmers to build out truly fun experiences. Because at the end of the day, that kind of thing just doesn't happen by itself a lot of the time.
Absolutely, yeah. I think Polytoria nails the corner of the market of, the hobbyist, the person who just wants to try out and make something fun and doesn't mind if nobody ever plays it, right? If it's just you and your friends, that's fine. And I think it is quite fun to do that on Polytoria if you just wanted an alternative to Roblox for the sake of being an alternative, because you either disagree with the moderation or or where the platform's heading. But absolutely, sort of, if we're talking about trying to dethrone Roblox, or at least even grow to the point where it is sustainable as a platform, where you can go and play a game and there's more than just one other person in the server. That's something that these alternatives struggle with. So I think there's a few different aspects where they struggle, and it's probably the combination that ends up killing these off. I think one of them is just the money situation, not even for the people creating on the platform, but just the platform itself. I think you need a lot of money to hire a lot of servers to be able to support the number of players that Roblox has. I think Roblox have essentially built their own cloud, and they've been able to do that by growing over a long period of time and by having a lot of investment, by proving that they are the best platform for this kind of UGC content. As a new platform in 2026, it's quite hard to convince investors of that, and cloud costs can grow really quickly. And we saw with Polytoria, they ran out of server capacity very, very quickly. Creekcraft dropped a video that got viewed by a lot of people. Everyone went to Polytoria to try and sign up, and the servers just went, no, we can't do anything. And I think I might have created my account, but then couldn't actually access the website for 3 days after that because the servers were just falling over. And as soon as that happens, everyone leaves the platform. You know, they had this massive influx as everyone watched that video from Creekcraft, went to try it out. No one could play, so they all left. And now we're back at the bottom of the curve again. And I think that's happened to a lot of these alternatives.
Yeah, and I think like thinking about what it takes to build a true Roblox competitor in 2026. I almost said 2025 there. It's sort of this interesting paradox in the sense that Roblox has developed this vision of a, to use such a frequently used word, this vision of a platform over the course of 20 years, starting out from a startup with no budget and just entirely, ideals and vision driven, to a public corporation with billions of dollars in research funding and a corporate structure and all of these things. And to try to compete with that, it's sort of a paradoxical thing that you need to build, because on one hand, you need to have insane amounts of money to, like you said, fund the servers and fund the research and fund the infrastructure that makes this sort of thing possible. And then you also simultaneously need to keep that central identity and vision very, very clear in terms of like, this is how we're going to handle user generated content, and this is how we're going to prioritize creators and players and give them what they want, while sometimes keeping the necessary safety checks in place and keeping the necessary like practical restrictions in place. Like, we need to include things like monetization for the sustainability of a platform in the long term. And it seems like to create something that is truly capable of being a Roblox killer, whatever that is, you need to be simultaneously a multi-billion-dollar publicly funded company and this ambitious group of startups startup creators who have this central vision of what a hobbyist, pure and like I don't know, I'm using a lot of adjectives here, but sort of a platform for the creators. And those are two very different things. And I think things that we see in Fortnite and Polytoria, and both approaches lack things, I think.
I think that's it. I think Fortnite has the money, but doesn't necessarily have the sort of the creativity and the hobbyist sort of approach to it, and Polytoria is the other end of the spectrum. And I think that an interesting point you mentioned there as well was moderation. I think a lot of people are flooding to these alternatives because they don't like age checks, they don't like the chat restrictions. And I think as soon as any of these small alternatives, if they did grow, they would be under the same scrutiny. And I think even if you are purely hobbyist and there's not real monetization in there, you still can't escape moderation. And so some of these platforms, a lot of these platforms end up restricting access for under 13s or just disable a lot of the social features for under 13s. And as controversial as it might be, those features being available for under 13s probably fueled Roblox's growth massively. And so
Absolutely.
there is this kind of awkward tension there for sure. But I think we can definitely see parallels with other technical or technological monopolies, like with Google, for example. If you tried to create a search engine today, you could not dethrone something like Google, because you need to somehow have all the information of the internet available within ideally much less than a second. Otherwise, people won't like it. There'll be too much friction and they'll go back to what they know with Google. But the only reason Google has all that information and all that power is because everyone's using Google. And so again, it's that paradox of how do you break out of that? How do you get the funding to somehow overthrow something like that? You would need billions, and why would you get that investment to do that? So it's tricky. It's tricky for sure, and I don't think monopolies are a good thing, but it's the reality of kind of how these structures work.
Yeah, and that's another thing I really wanted to make clear. On this sort of the past 40 minutes, I've been very cynical and very critical of a lot of these platforms, or these two specific platforms, and a lot of other attempts to compete with Roblox. To be clear, I think the vision of competition to the Roblox platform is a wonderful thing, and I am very happy that UEFN exists and they're pushing, practical things like greater pay shares to developers. They give a large chunk of monetization to their creators, for example. And I'm very happy that Polytoria is showing Roblox that there is a lot of player unsatisfaction and that some players are willing to go that as far as creating an alternative platform. So I'm definitely still very interested in the idea of alternatives to the platform. It's just that for the reasons we've outlined in the past 40 minutes, it's a very difficult thing to do. However, I certainly don't think we can expect to write off these two platforms and alternatives as sort of the last things in between Roblox and total world dominion. I think just to step out the Roblox frame and into the broader game development and indie game development frame, I think there's been, over the past couple of years, a very dramatic shift in the game development space in general, where it seems like, I don't know how closely you follow AAA titles in general, but it seems like there hasn't been a big successful franchise game release in a while. I remember there being a Battlefield title that came out that didn't do anything particularly crazy. There's the occasional Call of Duty that everybody's particularly excited for about a month and then they move on from. But it seems like the biggest things in gaming that I have personally noticed have been these indie titles like Peak and so I'm really floundering to remember any other names, but Lethal Company, all of these indie titles that are currently dethroning AAA. And it seems like AAA is very actively scrambling to figure out what it's doing. And I think a potential direction we could see some of these AAA titles going into is perhaps building a platform-like thing, not very different from what we see in Roblox today. And ultimately, as much as I think replicating what Roblox has is going to be a very, very difficult challenge, I'm absolutely up to see what people can create and or companies can create, because I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I think these AAA studios have the capabilities, right? They have the engines. They have solved, in a lot of cases, multiplayer gameplay and sort of monetization and things within their own games. So they definitely have the capabilities to produce competitor platforms. But yeah, I'm 100% with you that competition is a really, really good thing. And in some cases, it's kind of scary how easily, or not easily, but how we've allowed sort of some companies to become monopolies. And that is where capitalism pushes towards. And I don't want to turn this into a whole politics thing of capitalism versus other models, but
tuning into the next Beyond the Blox podcast. Is communism good or bad?
Oh dear. But it is a symptom of that, and it is interesting that a lot of these are also sort of these Silicon Valley US based companies as well. And I do wonder if we'll see any competitors coming out of other parts of the world as well, where Roblox is banned or heavily restricted for various different reasons. I wonder if we'll end up seeing anything come out of there too. But yeah, I hope there will be some interesting competitors, but I hope that they're not just Roblox clones. And I think that's kind of the important thing. Whatever these platforms do, if they simply try to replicate Roblox but with a smaller audience, what is the incentive to move other than just dissatisfaction with Roblox? Whereas if there's some sort of new innovation that pushes us, with Fortnite, it might be that the visual fidelity is better, or that it is a nice stepping stone into producing indie titles that you could release that run on Unreal Engine, and sort of a stepping stone into that. Whatever the unique offering is, I think if companies can produce a platform that is a little bit different, there have been attempts. Rec Room, for example, is an attempt that I think bet heavy on VR, and unfortunately we just didn't really see VR take off that much, and maybe that's what's hampered Rec Room from really being a solid competitor to these types of UGC platforms. But yeah, I think if we can get some interesting unique selling points for these other platforms, if nothing else, it will give us more options to explore.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that ties it back to the sort of identity crisis we've mentioned for both of these games. I think going in with the mindset of, hey, we're just going to do Roblox, but it's Fortnite, or hey, we're going to do Roblox, but we change the terms of service and the moderation policy a little bit, is very unsustainable when the thing you're trying to compete with is sitting at 12 million concurrent players on a Friday afternoon. And I think for any of these competitors to be, taken remotely seriously, or to have an identity and success of their own, they need to stand out in some meaningful way. And that ultimately is probably the hardest question to answer, and something that I'd love to talk more about, because Roblox has been able to craft this creator-focused but professional but also indie atmosphere and identity over the course of 20 years. So doing that in the span of a couple of months or years, no matter how much funding you have or how little funding you have, quite frankly, is a very, very difficult task to accomplish. So it may be quite a bit before we can all close Roblox Studio for the last time and move on to the next true Roblox killer, if there ever is such a thing.
I think on that bombshell, that's all we've got for you this week. Might have left you with more questions than answers, but I think it's a really, really interesting topic that keeps coming up again and again.
Be sure to like, share, and let us know what you thought of this week's episode down in the comments below. Are you switching to a Roblox alternative, or maybe building one yourself? Let us know.
Beyond the Box is produced by Seb Jensen for Last Level Studios. Watch on YouTube or Spotify, listen wherever you get your podcasts, and catch updates every week on TikTok and Shorts. Visit lastlevel.co.uk/podcast for more.